May 13th, 1943. Ridges north of Macher, Tunisia. The dust hangs in the noon heat like a gauze, and the last rattle of an MG-34 fades into the olive groves. Gefreiter Karl Weber, 21, dust-caked, throat-raw with thirst stares at the white strip of cloth tied to Oberfeld-Webel Ernst Kruger's bayonet. The strip trembles in the breathless air as Kruger lifts it above the shattered stone wall. Around them, the platoon's carabiner 98K rifles lie in a neat row, bolts open, oiled metal flashing, dull in the Sunday. Weber hears flies before he hears the Americans, boots creaking, webbed gear clinking, an M1 Garand's metallic ping somewhere beyond the grove. His tongue tastes copper. His canteen is empty. "Langsam," a voice barks in accented German. "Slowly." Sergeant Joe Alvarez, military police brassard, helmet chalked with a white MP, steps from the shadow of an oleander, Garand low but ready. Two riflemen fan left and right, fingers resting on triggers. Weber keeps his palms up, fingers spread. He smells his own sweat and the burnt wool stink of his tunic. Kruger, calm to the end, murmurs, "Keine Dummheiten." No foolishness. Behind them, Corporal Mueller helps Feldwebel Koch to his feet. Koch's boot is dark with oil from the broken MG tripod, his face gray with exhaustion. "Hände hoch, Waffen weg. Come this way," Alvarez says, tapping the air with his open left hand. The Americans look sunburnt and astonishingly clean, sleeves rolled just so, cartridge belts snug, canteen sloshing. Weber's eyes lock on the canteen. He tries not to stare, tries to keep dignity in the little parade of surrender as they step from the grove into a beaten field littered with spent brass, a cracked jerrycan, a torn map case. A medic in a Red Cross armband moves past, pausing only to glance at Koch's limp. Doc will see him at the cage. Alvarez calls, "Cage." The word has a ring of finality that settles into Weber's bones, like grit. The collection point is a hastily fenced rectangle of barbed wire staked beside a hard-pan road. The road itself is lined with Willys Jeeps and a pair of half-tracks, engines idling, petrol fumes shimmering in the heat. A sign, scrawled in chalk on a ration crate, PW. Inside the wire, men in field gray sit in silence, some staring at their boots, some smoking, some whispering in little islands of conversation that drift and vanish. The Americans process names with a clipboard and a calm Weber cannot read detached. "Victory?" A lieutenant with a narrow face and a fountain pen asks in careful German, "Name, rank, unit." Weber answers, "Gefreiter Karl Weber, 10. Company, Panzergrenadier, Regiment 104. The pen scratches. "Any officers among you?" Kruger steps forward, offers his paybook. The lieutenant nods once and gestures to a corner of the cage. Hours pass, measured by the shuffle of boots, the slosh of a water can. When the water comes, it comes in a battered metal jerrycan, the neck cinched with stained cloth as a filter. An American private tips it into enamel mugs, and the water tastes of rust and blessed cold. Weber drinks in 3 gulps, eyes closing, and when he opens them, the private is holding out something else with a half smile. A cigarette. Not a brand he knows. Lucky Strike, green packet. The paper crackles in Weber's dry fingers. He hesitates, then nods a thanks. The private strikes a match on his boot sole. Smoke. The first drag loosens the knot in Weber's chest. Minutes ago, he was a combatant. Now he is a prisoner. And smoke is smoke. By dusk, the convoy forms deuce-and-a-half trucks with canvas flapping, MP motorcycles ghosting ahead, the wire cage emptying into the truck beds. Weber climbs the tailgate, backs into a row of men, the bed smelling of dust and canvas and old gasoline. An American tosses a crate aboard. The lid stencils read, "C rations." The crate opens, tins, a slab of something pale wrapped in waxed paper, and impossible thought more cigarettes. A corporal tears open a can with a P38 opener, metal whispering, and passes down meat that tastes of salt and unfamiliar spice. "Corned beef hash," someone offers in halting German. "Eat." Morgan more. Weber chews, jaw aching. He glances at Kruger, who meets his eye and shrugs. So this is the enemy's food. The night road to Bizerte hums with the endless traffic of a victorious army. Searchlights rake low clouds, artillery booms far off like a storm remembering itself. The convoy stops at a port smelling of tar and oranges. Ships crouch at the dock, tall and black, their hull numbers painted bright. A Liberty ship's gangway creaks under the tread of prisoners and guards. On the cargo deck, new wire pens tidy, almost clinical await, rigged under the huge booms and cables. The ocean breathes through the hatchways, cool and salt. As the ship eases into the swells, Weber feels the land fall away inside him. North Africa recedes into rumor. Days become a rhythm. Reveille to the clang of the ship's bell. Muster by chalked numbers. A line for mess where steam curls from vats tended by galley men in aprons. The Americans ladle stew heavy with potatoes and meat into dented mess tins, slap down slices of fresh bread that steam when torn. Coffee black as sump oil, bitter life-giving sloshes in enamel mugs. There are rules, clearly posted in German and English. No talking after lights out, latrine buckets here, no smoking near cargo. But there is also order, a machine that keeps you fed, watered, and unbelievably respected. Once a day, an MP Corporal Irish name stitched above his pocket. O'Malley walks the pen, checking bandages, exchanging words with Kruger about the sea state and a scored-in chalk map that shows their westward progress. On the fifth morning, the horizon lifts from gray to green-brown. Gulls circle, crying, land. Weber presses to the wire, breath fogging the cool morning air. The Liberty ship follows a tug into a harbor bristling with cranes and warehouse roofs. An American flag snaps in the river wind, bright against a sky the color of tin. Men around him murmur, America. He does not know the city, only that its skyline is made of right angles and promise. On the dock, a line of khaki and olive drab waits with clipboards, and/or is he dreaming? Stacks of boxes stamped bread, still warm enough that the scent reaches him even here. He looks at Kruger. The Oberfeld-Webel's face is unreadable, the eyes calculating. We will see, Kruger says softly, more to himself than anyone. We will see what they are. The gangway thumps to the pier. The first squad of MPs files aboard, moving briskly, a practiced choreography. A sergeant calls in clear, carrying German, Ihr bekommt Essen, dann Zug, kein Laufen, kein Sprechen ohne Erlaubnis. You will receive food, then train, no running, no talking without permission. The word Essen floats like a benediction. As the line forms, an American baker flour on his forearms, cap pushed back, steps close to the wire and hands the nearest prisoner a heel of bread, crust crackling, steam in the cool. The German stares. The baker shrugs, as if to say, there is more. Weber feels something loosen again, a tiny knot, and for the first time since the white cloth went up over the stone wall, he allows his mind to imagine tomorrow, June 1943. Camp Hearn, Texas. The sun burns high over a horizon of wheat fields and barbed wire. Beyond the fence, windmills turn lazily, and the sound of cicadas hums like static in the heat. The German prisoners, fresh off a 2-day train journey from the East Coast, stand in neat rows, their field gray uniforms now dusted red from the Texas soil. The camp smells of creosote, pine boards, and something unexpected. Roasted meat from the mess hall. Gefreiter Karl Weber blinks against the glare. The world feels upside down. He had braced for a chain-link cage, for beatings, for starvation, the words Kriegsgefangener still echoing like a sentence. Instead, he's staring at rows of clean barracks, a water tower painted white, and a small American flag rippling above a gate marked simply Camp Hearn, U.S. Army POW facility. The gate guard nods as they file in, chewing gum, his Thompson slung casually over his shoulder. The prisoners are herded into the assembly yard, where a U.S. Army captain, clipboard in hand, reads out rules in slow, careful German. His nameplate reads, Capt. Morrison. His voice carries the tone of bureaucracy, not malice. Each man will be issued bedding, soap, towel, showers available daily at posted hours, meals served 3 times a day. No violence, no escape attempts, you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. The phrase hangs in the air. Genfer Convention. Weber glances at Kruger, who raises an eyebrow. The Americans are quoting international law? Here, in the middle of nowhere? An MP leads them toward the showers. The barracks smell of fresh lumber and disinfectant. Inside, bunks are stacked 2 high, clean sheets folded at the foot, blankets military tight. A ceiling fan turns lazily overhead. Weber drops his kit bag on the lower bunk and sits. It is softer than he expected. He hears laughter, real laughter, from the next room, where a group of prisoners marvel at the running water, one shouting, "Warm! Es ist warm!" When the whistle blows for chow, Weber lines up with hundreds of others under the shade of a corrugated awning. The mess hall is a long wooden building, windows open to the hot air, the smell of stew drifting through. American cooks, hairnets, aprons move behind a counter, ladling food onto metal trays. "Keep the line moving, fellas," one calls cheerfully. The translator beside him repeats in German, "Schnell aber ruhig." Weber grips his tray. On it lands a scoop of mashed potatoes, thick gravy, peas bright green as spring, and his breath catches 2 slices of roasted beef. At the end of the line, another soldier drops a small roll of bread onto his tray, soft, white, and steaming. "Coffee?" the man asks. Weber nods mutely. The soldier pours black liquid into a tin cup, its aroma rich and alien. They sit on benches, the clatter of utensils and murmured voices filling the room. Weber stares at his plate. He hasn't seen meat in months, not since before Tunisia. The last meal in North Africa had been hard biscuits and watery soup. He cuts into the beef, slow, deliberate, as though testing a dream. The flavor floods his mouth, salt, fat, warmth. For a moment, he forgets he is a prisoner. Across the table, Kruger eats with measured dignity. "Americans waste resources," he mutters, but his tone lacks conviction. Next to him, Mueller grins. "If this is captivity, I'll stay until the war's over." A ripple of laughter moves through the room, cautious but genuine. After lunch, they are given cigarettes. Lucky strikes again. Each man receives 2. Weber turns his over, studying the green paper, the neat American lettering. A corporal with an easy smile lights it for him. "Smoke up, pal," he says. "Ain't no use letting 'em dry out." Weber exhales, the smoke curling toward the tin roof. For the first time, he dares to meet the corporal's eyes. They are calm, unthreatening. The routine settles quickly. Roll call at dawn, work details in the garden or maintenance crew, lectures about camp rules, mail censored but delivered. At night, they gather outside. The Texas stars burning sharp above the floodlights. Someone hums a German marching tune. Another man, older, interrupts, "No songs of war tonight." Instead, they sing softly folk songs of home, of rivers and pine forests. The guards don't stop them. Within a week, small miracles begin to seem normal. The Americans allow them to write letters home. They distribute Red Cross parcels, chocolate, powdered milk, even magazines. A camp newspaper begins circulation, written in German. The library grows with each shipment of donated books. One afternoon, Weber walks past the camp canteen where a sign reads, "Ice cream 5 cents, POW currency accepted." Inside, a prisoner clerk stands behind the counter, handing cones to men in field gray, laughing as he tries to balance a scoop in the heat. A U.S. Private leans on the counter beside him, sharing a cigarette. There is no shouting, no hatred, just the strange rhythm of coexistence. Weber remembers the propaganda back home, the Americans, as degenerate, brutal, soulless. But here, in the middle of Texas, he is eating well, sleeping safely, even treated with a measure of respect. In a letter to his mother, he writes carefully, "We are well cared for. You would not believe it if I told you how much food they give us." The censors will read it, of course, but he hopes some of the truth will survive. That night, as the lights flicker out and the fan hums overhead, Weber lies awake. The wind outside carries the smell of grass and distant rain. For the first time in years, he is neither cold nor hungry. He stares into the dark, the enormity of the war pressing faintly against the walls, and wonders which side of the ocean truly knows what freedom means. By late summer 1943, Camp Hearn had become its own small, improbable world. A city of men who had once fought to kill one another now lived side by side, governed by a strange peace. Within the perimeter, life settled into patterns, both familiar and alien military discipline softened by civilian generosity. Each morning, the bugle sounded reveille. German NCOs, allowed to retain rank within the camp, formed their men in orderly lines. The Americans observed from their guard towers, rifles slung more from habit than suspicion. Work assignments varied. Some prisoners tended vegetable gardens that supplied the camp kitchen, others repaired fences or built furniture for nearby towns. In the laundry shed, the rhythmic hiss of steam irons mixed with low German singing. The days stretched long, but they were not empty. Red Cross trucks arrived weekly, bringing mail, medical supplies, and crates of reading material. A bulletin board by the mess hall posted news, both Allied and German, typed neatly in bilingual columns. One morning, Weber saw a headline that froze him: Hamburg bombed. Below it, the note read, "Thousands dead, city in flames." He folded his arms, staring at the paper as though it might change under his gaze. Around him, other prisoners murmured prayers or curses. Even here, the war reached them, invisible but unrelenting. Still, life demanded to be lived. The Americans encouraged recreation to maintain morale, the camp commander said. So the Germans built a soccer field. Old uniforms became team jerseys. Goalposts were welded from scrap pipe. On Sundays, hundreds of men lined the sidelines, cheering with the same passion they once reserved for battlefield glory. The guards watched from the shade, amused, passing canteens between them. "They're better at football than we are," one private admitted. A makeshift theater soon followed plywood stage, curtains sewn from blankets. POW carpenters built benches, and artists from Hamburg painted backdrops. In September, they staged Faust. The audience filled the hall, Germans in field gray, Americans in khaki, the air thick with cigarette smoke. When the lights dimmed and the opening lines echoed in Goethe's language, something remarkable happened. For 2 hours, war and captivity vanished. Applause shook the rafters. Even the guards joined in. Weber found work in the kitchen. He learned the rhythm of the American mess hall, the hiss of steam kettles, the metallic clatter of ladles, the measured chaos of meal preparation for thousands. The head cook, Staff Sergeant James Jimmy Doyle, was a stocky man with a grin that never seemed to fade. "You Krauts know your bread," Doyle said one afternoon, nodding approvingly as Weber kneaded dough. "My grandma'd like you." Weber didn't fully understand, but he caught the word bread and smiled back. Together they worked the dough, the language barrier bridged by the universal grammar of hunger. When the loaves came out golden, Doyle broke one open and handed Weber half. "Try it." Weber hesitated, then bit. Warm, yeasty, perfect. Doyle clapped him on the shoulder. "See, you teach me your way, I'll teach you mine." Later that evening, Weber noted in his journal, "The Americans bake as if they have all the time in the world." In small ways, suspicion gave way to curiosity. Guards began exchanging cigarettes for hand-carved trinkets, tiny ships, chess pieces, wooden rings. A lieutenant in the administration office commissioned a POW artist to paint his wife's portrait from a photograph. Even the chapel, a simple wooden hut with a cross above the door, became shared ground, hosting alternating Protestant and Catholic services, sometimes with both prisoners and guards kneeling side by side. Not every day was easy. The heat was relentless, tempers sometimes flared. A few die-hard Nazis tried to enforce ideological purity, threatening those who fraternized with Americans or expressed doubt about the Reich's cause. But the longer the war dragged on, the more hollow their words sounded. When letters arrived from home describing bombed cities, rationing, and despair, many prisoners began to question what they had truly been fighting for. One evening in October, after mail call, Weber sat with Kruger outside the barracks. The sergeant held a crumpled letter from his wife. "She writes that food is scarce," Kruger said quietly. "Children in the neighborhood faint at school. And here," he gestured to his plate, still half full of stew, "here we eat like kings." Weber said nothing. The thought lodged deep, uncomfortable. A few days later, the camp orchestra, a mix of professional musicians and amateurs, played for the guards. They ended with "Silent Night." When the final notes faded, even the Americans stood silent, hats in hand. Weber watched the faces around him, enemy, comrade, stranger, and realized how absurdly human it all was. By Christmas, the camp was decorated. Paper stars hung from the rafters. The Americans provided a tree, and someone painted ornaments from scrap tin. On Christmas Eve, both sides gathered in the recreation hall. The German choir sang Stille Nacht. their voices soft, steady, luminous. Then, from the back of the room, an American voice joined in, hesitant but true. Soon, the two languages wove together, the melody seamless. Afterward, coffee and pastries were served. A U.S. Sergeant stood to make an announcement. Tomorrow's meal will include roast turkey, stuffing, and by special request, sauerkraut. Laughter filled the hall. Weber looked around at the strange fellowship of war, enemies sharing music, bread, and brief peace beneath a Texas sky. Later, as the lights dimmed, he thought of home again, of snow, of his mother's hands dusted with flour. He realized with quiet astonishment that he would never again think of America as a place of faceless foes. It had become something else, a paradox, a land that imprisoned him and yet fed him better than his own army ever had. Spring 1944. The war, though thousands of miles away, had crept into Camp Hearn like a distant thunder. News trickled in through Red Cross bulletins and intercepted radio broadcasts. The German prisoners, now tanned from Texas sun and softened by routine, gathered around the bulletin board each morning, squinting at typewritten sheets that reported events in terse, neutral phrases. Eastern Front retreats near Kiev, Allied air raids intensify over the Ruhr, invasion rumors in France. Gefreiter Karl Weber read each line carefully, as if his family's fate were hidden between the words. Around him, murmurs rose like wind through dry grass. Some men refused to believe any of it, insisting the Reich would rebound. Others, tired, sunburned, and full of American bread, had begun to sense the inevitable. That evening in Barrack 12, letters were being written. Men hunched over wooden tables, the yellow light of a single bulb falling across paper and ink. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and soap. Weber's hand trembled slightly as he wrote. Dear Mother, I am alive and well. The Americans treat us humanely. I work in the bakery and have learned to make soft bread like you used to. We are fed 3 times a day. You must not worry. If only you could taste the bread here, you would not believe it. He paused. The censors would read it, he knew, but he continued anyway. It is strange, Mama. Our captors are kind. Sometimes I think of what we were told about them, and I cannot make it match the faces I see here. Maybe when this war ends, there will still be people left who remember what kindness looked like. He signed his name carefully, folded the paper, and sealed the envelope. When he looked up, Kruger was standing by the window, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. You write to your mother? Weber nodded. Kruger blew out a stream of smoke. Good. She'll need to know there's still decency somewhere. The next day, the camp buzzed with new activity. The Americans had introduced educational programs for the POWs, English lessons, vocational training, even history lectures. Some Germans attended out of boredom, others out of curiosity. The classes were led by university professors in uniform, their chalkboards covered with words like democracy and constitution. Weber listened more than he spoke. The ideas seemed dangerous and yet oddly logical. Freedom of speech, representation, government by consent. To a man raised under Hitler's shadow, it sounded like fiction. But it was a fiction he wanted to understand. Meanwhile, rumors spread that some German prisoners in other camps, Montana, Colorado, Arkansas, had written home describing similar treatment. Their letters reached families in the shattered cities of Germany, where civilians read them in disbelief. The Americans feed our sons well. They give them books. They let them work. For many Germans, those letters were the first glimpses of a world beyond the propaganda, a whisper that perhaps their enemies were not monsters after all. By June, D-Day had arrived. The camp awoke to the sound of distant cheering from the American side. Radios blared headlines. Allied forces land in Normandy. The guards celebrated openly, slapping each other's backs, singing snatches of victory songs. Within the wire, silence fell. Some prisoners gathered under the oak trees, talking in low tones. Others stared at the horizon as though willing themselves to see the beaches of France. Weber sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the floorboards. He felt no triumph, no anger, only the slow collapse of everything he had once believed unshakable. Kruger entered, holding the day's newspaper. They're in France, the sergeant said quietly. It's over. It just hasn't been signed yet. Weeks later, the camp commander, Colonel Thomas H., Eden stood before the assembled prisoners and made an announcement in English, translated into German. The United States is committed to upholding the Geneva Convention until every man is safely returned home. You will remain here until repatriation is possible. In the meantime, you are under our protection. Under our protection. The phrase echoed strangely through the crowd. These men had once stormed through Poland, Belgium, Russia. Now they were being protected by the very people they had sworn to destroy. The irony was not lost on anyone. Life continued in uneasy normalcy. The Americans organized film nights, black and white reels of Chaplin comedies, and war newsreels. The prisoners laughed at Chaplin but turned away from the news, unable to watch their homeland crumble frame by frame. One humid night, after the movie, Weber lingered outside the mess hall. Sergeant Doyle, the cook, leaned against a crate, smoking. "Hell of a picture, huh?" Doyle said. "Chaplin always gets me." Weber smiled faintly. "He reminds me of Clown at Home. Before war." Doyle nodded. "Yeah, before the war. A lot of things made sense back then." He flicked his cigarette into the dust. "You ever think about what you'll do when you get home?" Weber hesitated. "Home will not be same." So, guess none of our homes will," Doyle said softly. The summer dragged on, marked by news of Allied advances, German surrenders, and finally, the fall of Paris. For some, despair hardened into silence. For others, it became a kind of freedom, the collapse of illusion. By the time winter arrived, even the die-hard loyalists had stopped preaching. The swastikas sewn inside their caps had faded, the speeches grown hollow. In the camp's small library, once devoted to German classics, new shelves appeared. English poetry, American philosophy, textbooks. Men who once swore to die for the Reich now studied carpentry, agriculture, or the structure of democratic government. One night in December, Weber wrote another letter home. "Dear Mother, snow will be falling in Germany now. Here the air is cool, but no snow comes. I often think of you when I bake. The Americans say I have a good hand for bread. Sometimes when I smell it, I remember the kitchen in our old house. I do not know when I will see you again, but I promise this: I will return as a different man." He signed it, sealed it, and set it on the pile. Somewhere, across the ocean, his mother might one day hold that letter and wonder how war could make a man feel freer in captivity than he ever did in the world that sent him to fight. May 1945. The war in Europe was over. The radio in the Camp Hearn administration office crackled with Roosevelt's voice one final time before fading into reports of Germany's unconditional surrender. Inside the wire, silence fell not of relief, but of disbelief. Some men wept quietly. Others stared at the ground, unable to reconcile what they'd just heard. For years, they had been the soldiers of a 1,000-year Reich. Now that Reich had lasted barely 12. The next morning, the camp commander addressed them. "Germany has surrendered. You are no longer prisoners of war," he said through the translator. "You are now displaced persons under the care of the United States government. You will remain here until repatriation can be arranged." The words "no longer prisoners" felt like a strange kind of freedom, one wrapped in wire. For Weber, it was a day of conflicting truths. He walked the perimeter fence, running his fingers along the rusted wire, and realized how accustomed he had become to its boundaries. On the other side, guards leaned idly against their towers, smoking, their faces more relaxed than he had ever seen them. In the distance, the Texas wind rippled through wheat fields that looked almost golden in the afternoon light. It was a land untouched by the ruins of Europe. Life in the camp shifted again. The Americans began dismantling unnecessary facilities, preparing for the gradual repatriation of thousands. The Red Cross processed forms, doctors conducted health checks, and men speculated endlessly about what awaited them across the Atlantic. News clippings told of Germany divided into zones of occupation, cities flattened, millions displaced. When the first shiploads of returning POWs departed from the East Coast, many wept openly. Not out of joy, but from fear of what they were returning to and what they might have become. The voyage home was nothing like the one that had brought them to America 2 years earlier. Gone were the guards with rifles. In their place, U.S. officers shook hands as men boarded the ships. "Good luck, fellas," they said. "Maybe we'll see you again under better skies." Weber lingered at the top of the gangway, duffel over his shoulder. Doyle, the cook, stood by the dock, cigarette in his mouth, hand raised. "Hey, Baker," he called. "Don't forget, keep that bread soft." Weber smiled, raising his hand in return. "I will," he shouted, his voice breaking. The ship's horn drowned out the rest. The Atlantic stretched gray and endless. The prisoners know. Former prisoners lined the rails, watching the horizon. Conversations flickered between them, half hopeful, half afraid. Some planned to rebuild, others spoke of emigrating, starting over somewhere untouched by war. Weber stayed silent. He thought of his mother's kitchen, of the smell of yeast and flour, of everything that word home once meant. When they finally reached Bremerhaven, the harbor was a skeleton of twisted cranes and sunken ships. The air stank of oil and smoke. Allied soldiers directed the disembarkation with clipped efficiency. The men stepped onto German soil like strangers. Weber walked through the ruined streets of Bremen days later. Buildings stood hollowed, windows blown out like empty eyes. Children scavenged in the rubble. A woman traded bread for a bar of soap. It was Germany, but not the one he'd left. The uniforms, the slogans, the certainty, all gone. What remained was hunger and disbelief. In a refugee center, he presented his papers to a British officer who processed returning POWs. Occupation zone. British. You are cleared for relocation. The man stamped his form and handed him a ration card. That was it. No ceremony, no welcome, just the beginning of something new. Weber made his way south to Hanover, where he found the house still standing but barely livable. His mother, thin but alive, opened the door and gasped. "Karl." Her hands shook as she touched his face. He smiled and said softly, "I brought recipes." Over the next weeks, he baked bread again, using flour from Allied relief shipments. Neighbors came, first to barter, then to share. Each loaf became a quiet symbol of survival, a piece of America carried home, transformed by memory and mercy. Sometimes, when people asked about his captivity, Weber would pause. How could he explain that his enemy had fed him better than his own army? That in the land of his captors, he had found the first traces of humanity he'd thought lost to war? Years later, when Germany was rebuilding, Weber would tell his son, "They called us the enemy, but in America, I learned something. The real difference between nations isn't the language or the uniform. It's whether a man believes another man deserves dignity." He kept one memento from the camp, a faded Lucky Strike packet, green paper worn soft from time. Inside it, folded carefully, was a scrap of bread wrapper stamped Camp Hearn Bakery, U.S. Army. He would show it to visitors sometimes with a small smile. This, he'd say, was the taste of captivity and the first taste of freedom.